This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. They were never meant to exist this close, not in this world where fences divide the wild from the human heart. But he was there, a ghost on the edge of frost and timber. No taller than a farm cat, standing beneath the shadow of a leaning pine like something torn from a dream. Just beyond a fence post cracked with age and ice, he stood, quiet, trembling, his breath forming thin clouds in the morning mist. It was just past 5 a.m. near Cordellan, Idaho. The pine trees hadn't yet let the sun kiss the ground. A wet veil of fog clung to the broken tools, the chicken coop, the cracked woodpile stacked by the shed. It curled around the boots of Marlene as she stepped outside like she had every single morning for 30 years. Her hands were stiff, the metal scoop cold against her palm as she walked toward the feed bin. That's when she saw him. A lynx kitten, thin, ragged, no bigger than a shadow, but with eyes like molten gold, unblinking and strange. He didn't run, didn't twitch, didn't even look afraid, just looked right into her. Her chest locked tight. The scoop slipped and clattered against the bin's rim. What is he doing here? Where is his mother? Why is he alone? The questions came like winter wind, sharp and fast. She stepped back instinctively, but he didn't react, didn't flinch. He stood there like he was already fading, like he wasn't fully alive anymore. Bones jutted out beneath his patchy fur. His shoulders quivered, barely able to hold his weight. Something ancient inside her stirred. That aching pull, the same. Helplessness, she felt the night Bonnie, their old shepherd, was found tangled in wire years ago. That desperate urge to undo damage, to reach through pain and pull life back. But this wasn't Bonnie. This was a wild creature. She whispered, "You shouldn't be here, baby," then turned and walked away, the righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. All day Marlene watched, from behind the kitchen window. From the rocking chair on the porch, she kept expecting the little figure to vanish back into the woods like a dream melting in daylight. But when dusk settled and the sky painted the horizon with bruised purple and blue, she stepped outside and he was still there, same spot, same stillness, same hollow eyes, waiting. That's when she called Jack. They moved together under lantern light, slow and quiet like walking through a prayer. They didn't touch him, didn't chase him, just laid a faded wool blanket under the lean-to beside the shed, a bowl of water. A leftover piece of chicken? They gave him the choice. And the lynx, weak and uncertain, took it. He stumbled forward. On wobbling legs, sniffed the food, took one tiny bite, then curled into the hay like he'd always belonged there. He didn't look at the forest, didn't try to flee, didn't hesitate. He just stayed, and as Marlene watched from the doorway, arms folded like a shield across her chest, she knew this wasn't coincidence. He had chosen them. That night, sleep evaded her. Every creak of the porch boards, every rustle outside the window, every owl's call kept her eyes wide open. Twice she slipped from bed to peek through the curtain, expecting to find the spot. Empty, but each time he was there, curled in the hay, chest rising slow and shallow, still breathing, still with them. Even the wilderness and desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom with spring crocuses. Dawn came like a whisper, frosty, pale, and silent. Marlene stepped onto the porch, her breath painting ghosts in the air. The frost still glittered on the railing, and under the lean-to, the lynx stirred. He lifted his head, eyes met hers. No fear, no wild panic, just trust. "Good morning," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf. She placed more food, clean water, and stepped back. Only then did he move, slow and cautious. Jack came beside her, holding a steaming mug. "You think he's injured?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, limp, just tired, too tired to leave." They didn't speak after that, just listened. The pine trees murmured with wind. Inside, from the back room, the soft sound of Pa's Bonnie, their loyal Australian shepherd. She padded toward the door, nudged it open with her nose, and stepped outside. The moment she saw him, the world held its breath. Bonnie froze. The lynx froze mid-bite, their eyes locked like a spell. "Bonnie, number," Marlin whispered, but the dog didn't lunge, didn't growl. She dipped her head, cautious, protective. Her pups were still asleep behind her 3 fragile lives, barely 8 weeks old. She took 1 step forward. The lynx stayed still, another step, his ears twitched. Bonnie paused, sniffed, then sat. The lynx blinked, lowered his head, and continued. Eating, not a sound, not a fight, just understanding. Bonnie lay down. Not close, but not far. For the next hour she simply watched him, eyes calm, breath steady. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and a little child shall lead them. That afternoon they gave him a name, Sage, like the hillside behind the cabin, quiet, wild, stubborn enough to grow through stone. That night Bonnie lay near the shed, not touching, but near enough. And Sage didn't run, didn't retreat. He just closed his eyes and slept. The next morning brought magic. The pups, 3 of them, tumbled into the yard like clumsy clouds, soft, silly, barely able to balance. Bonnie nudged them gently, hurting them like a whisper, but this time Sage was there. Standing, watching, not tense, but alert. His ears turned slightly as the pups barked and stumbled across the frost-kissed grass. One of them, the smallest, a gray, speckled female, veered off and waddled toward him. Marlin froze. The pup stopped just a few feet away, nose up, curious, let out a short bark. Sage didn't move. She barked again, stepped closer. Bonnie didn't interfere, her tail stiff, her body still. And then Sage lowered his head slowly, deliberately, until his golden eyes were level with hers. The pup sniffed his nose. Her tail wagged, once, twice. Then she nestled herself against his leg like she'd always known he was safe. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, Marlin gasped. Jack whispered, "Did you see that?" The other pups followed, cautious, wide-eyed. They approached, circled, sniffed, and Sage let them press their warm little bodies against his fur. Let them crawl on his back. Let them belong. Then slowly he sat down in the hay, still, patient. Bonnie watched a moment longer, then rose and walked to him. She lay beside him, no growl, no command, just trust, just peace, just family. That afternoon they all slept together. A wild lynx, a shepherd dog, 3 clumsy puppies. It didn't make sense, and yet it was the most natural thing Marlin had ever seen. From the porch, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't even know why. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. An animal doesn't always need a voice to speak. Sometimes it just needs a home that listens. Some bonds aren't taught. They're chosen, carved not by instinct, but by something deeper, older, divine. And by the end of that quiet, soul-stirring week, the yard wasn't just a yard anymore. It had transformed into something sacred, a sanctuary stitched between the trees and the old farmhouse, where the border between the wild and the human blurred into something unnameable, where the thrum of paws, small and innocent, large and cautious, painted a language into the dirt. This wasn't just a clearing anymore. It had become a world. A world where a wild lynx named Sage no longer hovered at the edges of their lives, but walked within them. He no longer observed from afar. He belonged. He moved like a whisper through the tall grass, chasing the pups in slow, playful arcs. Never fast enough to frighten them, never rough enough to knock them over. When their tiny teeth tugged at his tail, he flicked it with mischief, lifting it just high enough to make them leap and tumble. He'd crouch low, his massive paws sinking into the earth, and let them climb his back like a living mountain. His movements were full of care, almost reverence, as if he'd realized these little creatures were fragile, and he was their quiet guardian. He made no sounds. But his eyes, those golden eyes, had changed. They gleamed brighter. They flickered. With presence. With light, Marlin stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in suds, but her eyes fixed on the scene beyond the window. It looked like something stolen from a dream. a bobbing tangle of fur and joy, of trust and healing. Jack, working near the chicken coop, had paused, tools dangling forgotten in his hands. No one wanted to miss what they were seeing. It was as if the mountain itself had gone silent to witness the miracle happening on their land. Sage darted forward suddenly, then dropped onto his belly in surrender. One of the pups, the boldest of the three, now puffed up with imagined strength, galloped toward him like a 4-pound warrior on a mission. Sage rolled to his side gently, letting the pup climb him like a victor on a battlefield. From beneath the old elm tree, Bonnie watched, calm, unmoving, her eyes soft but alert. Every so often she'd stand, make a slow circle around the group, ensuring everyone stayed close. It was clear now she had accepted him. He was part of them, but what caught Marlin off guard wasn't just Sage's presence. It was his longing, not for survival, but for them. He didn't just live near them, he needed them. He waited for the pups in the morning, stayed beside Bonnie through the long afternoon heat, followed Jack when he carried buckets to the coop, followed Marlin when she hung laundry on the line. Not like a predator lurking, not like something wild hiding in plain sight, but like a child afraid of being forgotten, afraid of being alone again. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. One evening, just before the forest swallowed the last of the light, Jack forgot to close the gate. Not that it mattered much. The old fence was more suggestion than barrier, meant to nudge deer away and keep chickens from wandering too far. Sage noticed. He stepped through the opening. Marlin, frozen in the doorway, held her breath. He padded toward the trees, his paws silent against the grass. He paused at the edge of the clearing. The shadows stretched toward him like old ghosts, the wild called. But Sage didn't answer. He turned quietly without fuss and padded back, past the coop, past the broken wheelbarrow, back to the hay beside Bonnie and the pups. He curled up in the same place he had chosen that first night. And Marlin, with tears in her eyes, understood. The woods would always be his. But this place, these souls, this was home. By the second week, they stopped wondering if he'd leave. The gate remained open, the forest line stayed close, and yet every dawn, without fail, Sage was there. Curled in the hay, head resting on one oversized paw, eyes watching the porch like it was the anchor of his entire world. He didn't roam, he didn't vanish, he stayed. The pups had grown braver. They tugged on his ears, climbed his back, snuck up on him with clumsy stealth and tiny yips that echoed like laughter. And Sage let them, always. Sometimes he'd pretend to collapse under their attack. Sometimes he'd stand still, letting them pretend they were mighty. But always he was gentle, always patient. It stopped feeling like a novelty. It became routine, a ritual. Marlin noticed things. How he'd pace in circles if one pup lagged behind. How he glanced toward the cabin every time the back door opened. How his ears perked when Jack's boots struck the porch step. Then, one afternoon, a hawk circled low. Its shadow swept across the yard, sharp, predatory. The smallest pup froze, body low to the ground. A whimper slipped from her throat. Before Marlin could move, Sage was there. Like lightning softened into fur. He stood between her and the sky, body low, golden eyes locked on the heavens. He didn't flinch until the hawk passed behind the hill. Then he nuzzled the pup gently, with his nose, as if to say, "I've got you. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God." That night, Marlin sat alone on the porch. Sage lay nearby, his breath slow, the pups nestled against him like puzzle pieces. She looked out at the trees, the wild, the freedom, the unknown. So much waited out there. So much that could have called him away. And yet, here he was, still, quiet, choosing them. She whispered into the dusk, "You could leave any time." Sage didn't lift his head. The wind stirred the grass. The stars blinked into the dark. She didn't need an answer. She already had one. It began with a cough. Just one, barely more than a whisper. Bonnie had always been quiet, even in discomfort. But Marlin knew the sound, not from dogs, from old things, fading things. from bones that had held too much for too long. At first it was only in the mornings, then after meals, then even when she lay still. By the third day Bonnie wasn't eating. She stayed curled near the shed, her body too tired, her breath too shallow. When Marlin called her, she lifted her head, but didn't move. Her eyes looked distant, as if seeing through time. The pups didn't understand. They pawed at her, licked her nose, yelped their confusion. She didn't respond. Sage sat near them, tense, still, his body pressed low to the ground, ears drawn back, watching, always watching. Marlin brought water to her lips. Jack tried with boiled meat. Nothing helped. On the fourth morning, Bonnie couldn't lift her head. Jack didn't speak. He just wrapped her gently in his old flannel jacket, the one he wore the day they first brought her home. His hands trembled. The air seemed to hold its breath. The pups cried, loud, desperate, confused. Their yelps echoed into the woods and came back hollow. Sage followed the truck down the dirt road, silent, steady, until the trees swallowed the sound. Then he sat at the edge of the clearing and waited. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The day passed like a funeral song. The sun rose and fell in silence. No one played. No one barked. No one ate. When the truck returned, the air seemed heavier. Jack stepped down slowly. His hands were empty. His head low, Marlin stood on the porch, arms crossed hard against her ribs, trying to hold in what she knew would break her. The pups ran toward the truck, tails wagging, then stopped. Mid-step, they knew, and Sage? He didn't move. He didn't run to greet Jack. He just sat. This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. The cold had teeth that night, but what bit hardest was not the wind, it was absence. Sage walked toward the shed like a creature remembering a dream. The hay was still pressed from where Bonnie used to lie, her scent fragile now, like breath on glass. He curled there, head nestled where hers once lay, and didn't move. Hours passed, yet he remained a statue of sorrow. Around him, the yard sprawled out, wide and hollow, a grave of memories. The pups, tiny bodies bundled with confusion, didn't sleep either. They scoured the yard as if their cries could summon her back. Noses to the cold grass, whimpers pressed into empty blankets, paws digging at hay that would never again warm their mother. Grief wasn't just an emotion, it was a living presence that night, and Sage, he didn't run, didn't retreat to the shadows where he once felt safest. He lay in the open, exposing his pain to the stars, his body coiled around the orphaned pups like a question the world couldn't answer. When one whimpered, he pressed his head gently against her, a silent lullaby in the shape of touch. From the porch, Marlin watched through tears, her breath fogging in the cold. Even Jack said nothing now. Her throat ached not from the air, but from the beauty, the unbearable tenderness of a creature grieving not alone, but with them. And it echoed a verse that refused to be ignored. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. That night was not about survival. It was about communion. The days blurred like frost on glass. The pups played, but without laughter, ate, but without joy. The spark Bonnie once ignited in them was dim. They began games only to drift away, mid-motion, as if the fun had slipped through their tiny paws. And Sage, he never left. He was their constant now. No more chasing butterflies or rolling in autumn grass. He watched instead. Stayed beside them like a shadow that warmed instead of chilled. Every time they curled into him, he made space. He gave warmth. And then one afternoon, the smallest stood still in the middle of the yard, crying, not loudly, but brokenly. Her gaze was locked on the woods, her body shaking as though some invisible string was pulling her heart out into the wild. Sage approached slowly, a ghost of gentleness. He paused beside her, then nudged her back toward the cabin. Marlin dropped the dish in her hands, water running cold down her wrist. That movement, the patience, the grace, it was Bonnie's, but not just remembered, it was embodied. A legacy passed not in words, but in instinct. Bonnie hadn't left them alone, she had left them in his care. And Marlin realized then that love doesn't always end in absence. Sometimes it finds a new vessel. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Bonnie's spirit had returned, yes, but it hadn't left them. It was Tuesday. The knock was sharp, not cruel, but cold, official, the kind of knock that made your gut tighten before your brain caught up. Jack opened the door, grease on his hands, and Marlin stood just behind, holding a blanket she hadn't been able to fold all morning. 2 men, 1 clipboard, 1 unreadable face. "We received a report," the officer said, his words like clipped branches. "Wild lynx on private property." Jack didn't flinch. "You can look, he's not hiding." And there, under the elm sun licking their fur, the pups slept. And just beside them, unchained, unafraid, was Sage. The officer's eyes narrowed. He spoke of violations, custody, public safety, words that meant displacement. But Marlin's voice cut through the cold. "He came on his own. He stays on his own." Sage stood as if on cue, not in threat, in grace. He walked toward them like a sentinel and passed, unbothered, unbowed, to sit again beside the pups. One stirred, yawned, and curled into his side. The officer blinked. Something human flickered in his eyes. "You've got 72 hours to submit custody paperwork," he said, clipboard trembling slightly. "If not, we'll take him." The door closed behind them. But Marlin knew then no door could shut out the truth anymore. He was no longer wild. He belonged to something deeper than habitat. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And his heart was here. They didn't wait. Jack was on the phone before the sun dipped below the ridge. Marlin's fingers shook as she typed emails, attached photos, Sage guiding a pup from the creek. Standing at the cabin door, curled around them like a protector sculpted from wind and fur. Neighbors came. "What I saw with those puppies, it ain't natural," one whispered. "It's something else, something holy." Word spread like fire. Then a call, Wild Roots, a wildlife nonprofit. A woman with soft eyes knocked, phone in hand, showing the video Jack had posted, 30 seconds. Sage, the pups, the trees whispering around them. It had gone viral. Over 10,000 views. Behind those numbers were hearts, moved, shaken, ignited. An attorney reached out next, pro bono. Help with wildlife exemptions. Help to fight for Sage's right to stay. By day 3, they had a case, letters, legal support. A slow, roaring swell of compassion. And then the same officer returned, alone, no clipboard. "I saw the footage," he said. "There's precedent, rare, but it exists." He handed Jack a folder. Provisional wildlife exemption. Temporary, but real. Sage could stay. Jack nodded. Marlin pressed her hand to her mouth. "Sage?" He walked right to the porch like he'd always known the outcome. And it echoed loud in their souls. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." No celebration. Just belonging. A month passed and winter settled its breath across the land. Pines held snow like prayers. The pups were wild with energy now, fast, loud, joyous. The yard became their kingdom. And behind them, steady as moonlight, came Sage. He didn't lead, didn't play. He watched, corrected, protected. When games turned too rough, he stepped in. When curiosity wandered too far, he guided them back. He wasn't their brother anymore. He was something more, something sacred. Trust had rooted itself in them, grown vines around their hearts. Some mornings he vanished. Into the woods. Alone. But he always came back, always, like the returning tide. Marlin would glance out, and there he'd be, waiting. Snow on his shoulders, silence in his eyes. He never knocked. Never called, but he was always present. The blanket, Bonnie's, still hung by the door, folded, clean, untouched. But her warmth, it never left. It simply moved, from her fur to his, from her heart to his presence. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The shadow had come. But so had the light. Some hearts, no matter how wild, will always find their way home. The snow fell in silent flurries that evening, dusting the porch planks like powdered time. Marlin hadn't yet moved the blanket. It still hung there by the door, untouched, like a shrine to what was. She told herself she would, one day maybe, when it didn't ache to breathe near it. But tonight she only watched. Through the glass, steam rising from the mug in her hand. She watched as Sage stretched out across the wood with 2 pups nestled into his side. They didn't twitch with sorrow anymore. They sighed into sleep. Their tiny bodies rose and fell in rhythm with his, as if his breath were theirs. That ache inside her, the one that had clung like fog since Bonnie's final day, didn't vanish, but it softened, just enough to let in light. Jack had started calling him the old soul. Not because of age, Sage was still young, still lean with strength, but because of the way he moved, slow, intentional, like he was walking through the world, not to conquer it, but to understand its hurt. Like he had seen grief before and decided, without fanfare, without words, to stay behind and carry what remained. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. That night, the pups played in the snow until exhaustion overtook them, wrestling until their legs folded beneath them and laughter turned to long yawns. They collapsed beside Sage in a tangle of ears and tails, pressing their bodies against his without hesitation. He didn't stir, just blinked once and let them. The snow sparkled around them like a blanket stitched by the stars. Marlin stood at the threshold, her hand warming the mug that had long since gone cold. She didn't speak, didn't need to, because some things aren't taught, they're called. And Sage had been called, not by a whistle, not by food, but by something ancient and unspeakable, a bond, a soul link. He was a creature born of wilderness, yet he had answered the call of something deeper than instinct, something that pulled him not into the forest but toward a family. And in that moment Marlin understood, some animals are born wild, but some choose to stay. For where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Sage could have vanished the moment his strength returned. The forest had never closed its doors. The mountains beyond had always been open, endless. And yet, every morning, through mist or snow, he came back, quietly, deliberately, not out of need, out of choice. His paw prints carved paths not away from them, but toward them. He filled a space no one else could, not to erase Bonnie, never that, nothing could, but to hold what she left behind, like a keeper of her love. He didn't wear a collar. No leash ever graced his neck. Yet he was theirs and they were his. A pact written not in ink, but in glances, gestures, and nights held in shared silence. People still ask, of course, neighbors, hikers, the occasional reporter. They ask what he is, wild, rescued, domesticated? The answer isn't easy, but it is honest. He isn't wild. He's chosen. Chosen by the pups, chosen by the porch, chosen by the very egg Bonnie left behind. And maybe most of all, chosen by his own heart. The spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. Every story shared by Jungle Diaries begins with a cry, sometimes from a cage, sometimes from the woods, sometimes from a soul that doesn't yet know its longing for connection. But always, these stories end the same way, with hearts changed, with bonds forged, with animals finding not just safety, but purpose. When you watch these emotional true stories, like Sage's, you're not just viewing a video. You're participating in something greater. You're amplifying compassion. You're helping other animals just like him find the love, the care, the home they deserve. Because animal rescue isn't just about survival, it's about transformation. It's about wild bonds, touching animal stories, heartwarming animal videos that remind us all how sacred this shared world really is. Non-profit rescue groups, like the one that stepped in for Sage, are lifelines. They aren't just networks of care, their family is reborn. Their work spans far beyond medicine or shelter. They are stewards of responsibility, of animal welfare, of wildlife conservation. And in every saved creature, in every silent healing moment, they remind us what it means to love responsibly, to choose kindness when no one else will, And we, the viewers, the believers, the sharers, we become part of that mission. 1. Voice, one click, one act of hope at a time. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. So join us at Jungle Diaries, where every rescue becomes a revival, where every story becomes a voice, and every voice becomes hope.